Okay, so in this demo video I'm going to show you piercing. So what piercing is, it is when you cut through the surface of the clay into through the other side. So on this back side you can kind of see the piercing. You can see through the side of the pot where I had already pierced the other side as my example. So the first thing I did for my piercing is I decided what design or template or what design I want to put on the pot and created a template to help me put that design on there evenly. I'm not putting my design all the way around because I don't want to pierce the whole thing. It's just going to be a section here and then a similar section directly on the opposite side. So I used some cardstock. I used a compass and stuff to measure out my template so that it's as even as I could get it. And I've already traced most of them out. I have 3 going vertically in a line here and then 2 on each side. So I place my template on, I use my needle tool, and I'm just going to trace onto the surface of the pot my template. This can take a little bit, which is why I did most of it before I filmed the video, so that I only have to do a couple of them on here. So I'm going to get again, I'm going to line up my template with my design that's already there. It doesn't line up perfectly, but that's okay, because my lines will get carved away to some extent anyway, so you won't see those extra lines that are there. Okay, so I've got my template traced on to the surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to then take an X-Acto knife and I'm going to cut these pieces out, right? Because those are the ones that I don't want on. And what will happen is when I cut these out, I'll leave these connections there so that this part will actually stay in that middle part. Okay. If I were to cut this out, if I were to cut this shape out, what would happen is these would fall out because there would be nothing there to hold them. So I need, when I pierce, I need something to hold up my interior design. So if I would cut this out, right, I could cut this and this and this, but then I wouldn't have this piece in the middle. Okay, so when you're doing piercing, you got to think about how these all work together and connect, so that you're not cutting out huge sections of the pot that you don't want. So I'm just using my X-Acto knife. I'm going to push it all the way through the clay. That's kind of hard to see. I'm going to push it all the way through the clay, and then I'm going to cut along my line, and when I get to my other line I'm going to stop and pull the X-Acto blade out, change spots, do the same thing again, and then do the same thing here. Now when I go to take this out, I want it, because of the narrow diameter of my pot, right, when I cut, it's actually thinner on the inside than it is on the outside. So if I were to push it through, I'd end up, the back of the pot would end up pulling out like this. So I want to push it back through the front because it'll come out a lot easier than if I were to push it back and through. So I'm going to keep doing that. I'm going to cut out all 6 of these little triangles. I'm going to switch hands. I know it's not going to be easy to see, but since I'm right-handed, it'll be a little bit easier and quicker for me to do it this way. So there's a number of different artists that do piercing. Eric Stearns is one of the ones that does a lot of piercing in his work, and he does a lot of geometric patterns, piercing out little squares, and he measures all those out before he does them. So I would encourage you to go check out his work, as well as a number of others that do piercing, but he's the one that comes to mind right now off the top of my head. So while this makes my pot here no longer functional because I now have a bunch of holes in it, I can do this for decorative purposes, and I can put dried stuff in it, dried flowers, whatever. I could put a light in it, so it'd be more like a lantern, or any number of things, to help that design pop out and stand out a little bit more. This particular piece I threw on the wheel because it was just faster in getting the piece ready for the demo video. You can easily pierce coil pots or any hand-built pots, slab-built pots or slab-built forms and vessels and stuff. So now I have those pieces out and missing. So what I would probably do next is then I'd start carving, because I'd want these individual designs and things to stand out. So I pierced, and then on this side you can see I started to carve. You can kind of see the contour of it as it changes in profile, so that these stand out. And I carved all the way around the outside too. So as I come back here, what I'll probably end up doing is carving a lot of this out, so that these look like they're coming out off the surface. And it almost looks like you took separate pieces and applied them on the surface. And then I begin smoothing it out again, so that it looks like a natural transition from where these are out into this surface, kind of like what I did on this middle piece, where I made a natural transition, tried to make a natural transition from where I carved. Let's see if I can get this in profile for you, where I carved here out to the top of this surface. I didn't touch out here, I just carved like a slight slope into it. I did the same thing here. Basically, wherever the middle part ran into the bigger part, or the smaller part ran into the bigger part, I carved that so it looks like it's lower and it goes behind. So that's how you can create some piercing designs on the pot. Again, I didn't go all the way around, and that's just because you'd be able to see most of this. Even from the side, you'd see both sides, right? And if I went all the way around, there's no guaranteeing that this would all line up perfectly without measuring it and making sure that my template is exactly fitting all the different places on here, because this isn't necessarily going to fit right away or perfectly in between those two. It fits pretty well, but it's off. It's definitely off on the one side, and definitely is stretched out here. Right, so it's not fit to this pot exactly, so to go all the way around would be tough. So I just chose a couple different spots where I can create my design. So that's using piercing to create a decorative approach, or change the whole form of your pot and change its look so that it's a little more visually interesting and appealing, and then doing a little bit of carving on the surface to make that design stand out a little bit. So that's how you would use piercing to change the look of your vessel.